I still remember the sound of my father's laugh that night, sharp, amused, and cruel enough to slice through every conversation at the table. "She can't even afford a car," he said, tilting his wineglass as if he'd just delivered a punchline worthy of applause. The guests laughed politely the way people do when the host sets the tone. My cheeks burned, but I didn't flinch. I stirred my tea instead, pretending not to notice the way every eye flicked toward me, the daughter who had apparently failed the Bennett name. That dinner was supposed to be just another Sunday tradition. Instead, it became the night everything began to change. The house was warm, filled with the scent of baked apple pie and roasted vegetables. It was my father's favorite kind of evening, formal enough for him to feel important, casual enough to remind the neighbors that he was just a family man. The long, heavy table gleamed under the chandelier, a setting we'd repeated every week for as long as I could remember. My brother Ryan sat at his usual spot beside our father, his large, expensive watch catching the light each time he gestured. He was already half a glass deep into his second Merlot, telling stories about his newest real estate project in Midtown. 6 condos already under contract, he boasted, tapping his fingers on the table. Investors are lining up for the next phase. My father chuckled approvingly. "That's my son. Always moving forward. Always building." Then his gaze drifted toward me, the smile tightening. "And Laura, still doing whatever it is you do?" I swallowed a sip of tea. "Yes, Dad. Still consulting." "Consulting," he repeated, drawing out the word as if tasting something sour. "Is that what they call unemployment these days?" A few guests laughed, not cruelly, but enough. The sound filled the space between us like smoke. I set my cup down carefully, forcing a polite smile. "It's going well," I said softly. Ryan leaned forward. "Come on, Laura, don't be shy. Tell us what kind of consulting." "Dad keeps saying you're doing something with education technology and education," I replied. "I design systems that help schools manage digital learning programs." Ryan grinned, exchanging a glance with our father. "So basically spreadsheets and charity work." The laughter came again, louder this time. My father didn't stop it. He never did. He leaned back in his chair, pleased by the attention, and said, "It's cute, really. She always wanted to save the world. But at some point, you have to grow up and buy a car that doesn't come with a bus pass." Heat flushed up my neck. My old sedan sat parked outside, clean and reliable, though hardly impressive among the BMWs and Teslas lining the driveway. I hadn't come here to compete, but that didn't matter. In my father's house, worth was measured by presentation. "Dad," I said quietly, "I like my car. It does what it needs to do." He waved a dismissive hand. "Of course you do. Mediocrity always feels comfortable to those who settle for it." I heard a few guests shift awkwardly. My mother, as always, kept her eyes on her plate. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than defense. I tried to breathe through the sting, tried to remember that I'd promised myself I wouldn't react this time. Still, something inside me cracked a soundless splinter, deep and permanent. Dinner continued, the clinking of cutlery masking the low hum of gossip. The Whitmans were there, one of Dad's business associates, and his perfectly polite wife. They laughed at every story Ryan told, and Ryan in turn basked in their admiration. When the conversation drifted toward success and legacy, my father was in his element. "You build something people can see," he said, gesturing toward Ryan. "That's real success. Buildings, assets, recognition. Not this invisible online work." "Some things that matter can't be seen," I murmured. He turned his head sharply. "Spare me the philosophy, Laura. You're 32, not 16. This is the age for results, not excuses." My fork paused mid-air. I forced myself to look him in the eye. "Results come in many forms." He laughed again cruelly. This time, "Really? Tell me, sweetheart. Where are yours parked?" The guests chuckled. Someone coughed to hide discomfort. I pressed my napkin into my lap, folding it into smaller and smaller squares. Ryan smirked. "Don't be too hard on her, Dad. She means well. Maybe she'll get there one day if she ever figures out what she's building." I wanted to tell him that I already had, that the company he dismissed as a little project had contracts spanning 5 states. that the software I'd developed was being tested in hundreds of schools. But that wasn't the time. Not yet. Instead, I smiled faintly and said, maybe. That answer seemed to amuse them even more. My father raised his glass. To Ryan, proof that ambition runs in at least one of my children. Glasses clinked. My mother's hand trembled as she lifted hers. She didn't meet my eyes. I excused myself to the kitchen, claiming I needed water. In truth, I needed air. The noise from the dining room faded as I stepped into the dim quiet. I leaned against the counter, staring at the reflection of the chandelier in the window. The woman staring back looked composed, but her heart was pounding. Every insult replayed in my mind like a broken record. She can't even afford a car. Consulting means unemployment. Mediocrity feels comfortable. Each word settled deeper, pressing against something that had been sleeping for too long. I took a long breath, the air cool against my throat. I thought about the last few years, the nights I'd spent coding until dawn, the teams I'd led quietly, the contracts I'd signed under NDAs that kept my name off the headlines. None of it mattered to them. They saw only the version of me that fit their narrative, the dreamer, the disappointment, the girl who never measured up. But that night, as the laughter from the dining room echoed faintly through the walls, I made myself a promise. No more explanations. No more apologies. If they wanted to measure worth in possessions, I would let them. But when the truth finally surfaced, they wouldn't see it coming. I poured a glass of water, my hands steady again. From the other room, I heard my father's booming voice announcing Ryan's next business award. The applause followed. I smiled, not bitterly but knowingly. They thought power meant control. I knew better. Power was patience. Power was silence, waiting for the right moment to speak. And my moment was coming. When I stepped back into the dining room, Ryan was still holding court. My father barely noticed me. I took my seat, calm now, almost serene. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" my father asked without looking up. "Perfect," I said. He smiled, misreading my tone. "Good. Maybe one day you'll surprise us." I held his gaze across the table and answered quietly, "Maybe sooner than you think." The next laugh that followed wasn't mine, but it didn't matter. I knew the truth hidden beneath their assumptions, and that truth was bigger than their entire empire. That night, as I drove away in my modest sedan, the headlights gliding across the quiet road, I whispered to myself, "Let them laugh. They'll see soon enough." And somewhere between the city lights and the cold, dark highway, I realized it wasn't humiliation that fueled me anymore. It was clear. Because sometimes the cruelest words don't break you, they build the fire you'll use to light your way back home. The road home was almost empty, a long stretch of wet asphalt reflecting the city lights. My father's words still echoed in my head, each one sharper than the last. "She can't even afford a car." It was amazing how humiliation could sound so casual when it came from someone who once taught you to speak. I rolled down the window just enough to feel the cold air hit my face. It helped me think. It helped me remember who I was before his laughter tried to define me. The clock on my dashboard blinked 10:45 at night. My sedan hummed quietly, steady, loyal, so unlike the people I'd just left behind. A row of polished cars had lined that driveway, a silver Mercedes for Ryan, a black Audi for my father, my mother's pearl white SUV. Mine had been the only car without a luxury badge, but also the only one paid for in full. Funny how wealth could be so loud, and worth could be so silent. At a red light, I glanced at the small notebook on the passenger seat, the one I'd carried for years. It wasn't a diary. It was a plan. Pages filled with designs, ideas, names of schools and programs that had trusted my vision when no one else did. I flipped it open to a list of pending contracts. One had a small star beside it, Aurora Systems, National Integration Proposal. My proposal. My company. The one they believed was just a hobby. The light turned green and I pressed the gas pedal lightly. The road stretched ahead like a promise. I passed the riverfront where the skyline shimmered against the water. My reflection appeared faintly in the window, calm, unreadable. That was the part of me my father never saw. Patience. the calculation, the quiet belief that the right kind of revenge wasn't noise, it was progress. My phone buzzed against the console. I ignored it until I reached a quieter street. Then I picked it up. A message from Evelyn. Evelyn, contract draft ready. Need your signature before midnight if you want to lock the deal. I smiled. Evelyn never slept either. Me. I'm on my way. Send it to my private server. Evelyn already did. Also congrats. They approved the federal education grant. We're officially in. I stared at the screen, the words glowing in the dark. We're officially in. That meant the funding was secured, the pilot schools could launch, and every piece I'd built these past 4 years was finally ready to fall into place. The same night my father mocked me for not owning a car worth showing off my company had just landed a multi-million-dollar government partnership. Life had a sense of timing that bordered on poetic. I pulled into the quiet neighborhood of Glenmere Heights, where my house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac. It wasn't big, but it was mine. 2-story soft light spilling from the porch lamp, the faint scent of rain in the air. Ryan used to call it a starter home, as if owning something modest was temporary shame. But to me it was freedom. No mortgage, no debt, no one else's name on the deed. I sat there for a moment, and let the engine idle. The silence was thick. In that stillness, I could almost hear my mother's voice, years younger before all the dinners and the status games. Laura, your father thinks the world runs on appearance. You'll prove it runs on integrity. I whispered into the dark, I'm trying, Mom. Inside the house felt warm. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the quiet creak of the floorboards, it all grounded me. I kicked off my heels, loosened my hair, and walked straight to my office at the back of the house. To most people, it looked like a simple workspace, 2 monitors, a desk, a potted plant. But one wall was a hidden door. I pressed my hand against a narrow panel, and it slid open, revealing the real heart of my life. A fully equipped operations center, glowing softly under rows of LED lights. Screens lined the wall, each displaying data streams, coding interfaces, and real-time analytics from my development teams across the country. Aurora Systems wasn't just a consulting gig. It was a national educational technology company with over 60 employees, all working remotely under confidentiality contracts. We built adaptive learning systems for schools, corporations, and government agencies. And tonight, I'd just secured the biggest deal of our existence. I sat down, typed in my access key, and watched the new contract load on the main screen. Federal Education Access Program, Aurora Systems, selected as principal provider. Contract value $22.5 million. My throat tightened slightly, not from greed, but from validation. They thought I was invisible. They had no idea I was running one of the fastest-growing edtech firms in the region. A notification blinked. A message from Evelyn again, Evelyn Press already scheduled for next month. But you might want to delay the public reveal. Me. Why Evelyn? Because once they find out who the CEO is, your family won't stay quiet. I leaned back in my chair, smiling faintly. That's the point, I murmured. For years, I'd let them define success as something loud, flashy, and external. Now I was about to redefine it quietly, methodically, and irrevocably. A memory surfaced me at 16, standing in my father's office holding a scholarship letter to MIT. He barely looked up from his papers. That's nice, he'd said. But your brother just made varsity captain. That was the day I learned that in the Bennett household, attention was a currency I'd never earned by existing. So I stopped asking for it. Instead, I built something they couldn't ignore. I scrolled through the contract one last time, signed my name digitally, and sent it back. The cursor blinked twice, confirmation tone soft and final. Deal closed. Outside, the rain began again, light, steady, rhythmic. I turned off the lights in the office and stood by the window. My car sat under the glow of the street lamp drops sliding down the windshield. Reliable, practical, unassuming. A part of me almost laughed. The man who mocked me for driving that car had no idea that the company funding his latest project license fee came indirectly through mine. Aurora Systems had supplied the city's digital learning framework, the same infrastructure Ryan bragged about managing in his developments. I whispered to the glass, "So technically, you're working for me, brother." The thought wasn't bitter. It was poetic. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Robert, my chauffeur. Yes, I had one. Though my family never knew. Robert. Confirmation from the airfield, ma'am. Jets ready whenever you need. Me. Thank you, Robert. Not tonight. Robert. Understood. Good night, Ms. Bennett. I smiled at the screen. Good night, I whispered back. I sat there a while longer, watching the lights of the city flicker beyond the rain. In that glow, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not revenge exactly, not triumph either. It was clarity. One day soon, they'd see me not as the daughter who failed to meet expectations, but as the woman who quietly exceeded every single one. And when they finally learned who truly owned Aurora Systems, who signed the checks they envied, who built the legacy they claimed to protect, they'd realize the truth. I never needed their approval. I just needed time. The rain kept falling outside, soft and certain, like the sound of justice taking shape. By Monday morning, the city had already swallowed the weekend whole. The sky hung low, the kind of dull gray that makes every skyscraper look colder. I sat in the back of my sedan, scrolling through my phone as Robert drove me downtown. The traffic was slow, the radio low, and my thoughts sharper than the skyline. I had an investor meeting at 8 and a video call with the Department of Education at 9:30. My schedule was tight, but my mind kept drifting back to that dinner, the smirk on Ryan's face, the sound of my father's laugh echoing over crystal glasses. Rough night? Robert asked, glancing in the rear-view mirror. I looked up, caught his reflection. The usual, I said softly. Family. He nodded knowingly. The worst kind of battlefield. That made me smile. You've got that right. He pulled into the underground parking of Aurora Systems headquarters. From the outside, the building looked like any other midtown office tower, modern, minimalist, anonymous. But inside, it was the heartbeat of a company most people had never heard of, yet used every day. That anonymity was intentional. It gave me freedom. It gave me power. I stepped out of the car and adjusted my blazer. My reflection in the elevator door looked composed, efficient. Everything my father used to claim I wasn't. When I reached the 38th floor, Evelyn was already waiting by the glass entrance. Her hair was tied back, her expression calm but urgent, a coffee in each hand. You look like you slept 2 hours, she said, handing me one. 3, I corrected, taking a sip. But the deal's worth it. The contract's official, she said. Federal Education Access Program signed and sealed. Congratulations, Laura. You just became one of the most influential women in EdTech. I exhaled slowly, letting that truth sink in. Influence, I said. Funny words. Doesn't feel like it when your own father thinks you're unemployed. Evelyn tilted her head. You could tell them. I could, I said. But where's the lesson in that? We walked down the corridor lined with glass offices. Employees greeted me with nods, smiles, quiet acknowledgement of respect. Most of them didn't know my full story, and that was fine. What mattered was that they trusted my leadership. At the end of the hall, a large touchscreen wall displayed real-time analytics schools, connected students, enrolled systems active. The numbers kept climbing bright green against black. 250 new districts this week, Evelyn said, checking her tablet. We're expanding faster than projected. Good, I said. Let's make sure quality keeps up with growth. I won't let this become another corporate machine. Evelyn smiled. That's what sets you apart, Laura. You actually care. I didn't respond, but inside her words warmed me. Caring was the thing my father called weakness, the thing that had become my company's greatest strength. By 9:30, I was in the conference room facing a wall of digital faces, officials, consultants, advisors. The Department of Education call was precise and procedural, but as I presented Aurora's model, I could feel their curiosity turn into admiration. We're impressed with your scalability, one director said. Your system's adaptive framework could revolutionize nationwide education access. Thank you, I replied. Our mission isn't just technology, it's equity. Every student deserves the same opportunity to learn no matter where they live. When the call ended, Evelyn leaned toward me. You just made history. Again. I gave a faint smile. Don't tell my family. We both laughed, though something in my chest tightened at the thought. That afternoon, as I reviewed contracts in my office, my phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed Dad. I froze. We hadn't spoken since the dinner. I hesitated, then answered. Hi, Dad. There was a pause long enough for me to hear the faint hum of his office behind him. Laura, he said, his tone clipped. Your brother mentioned you're consulting for the city. I closed my laptop slowly. Something like that. Good, he said. Maybe this will help you get back on your feet. Ryan's hosting a business dinner Friday. Bring some networking cards. Might open doors for you. I bit back a laugh. That's thoughtful, Dad. But I have my own doors now. He sighed, that familiar sound of disappointment disguised as concern. Laura, I just want you to be practical. You're 32. It's time to think long-term retirement stability. Volunteer work doesn't pay the bills. I pressed my fingertips against the desk. I'm not volunteering. I'm running a company. A company, he repeated, amused. You mean your little computer project? The one you started in that spare bedroom? Don't get lost in fantasy, sweetheart. Be realistic. Something inside me hardened. The same old pattern, doubt, dismissal, condescension. He hadn't changed. I'll see you Friday, Dad, I said evenly. Maybe we'll talk about reality then. Before he could respond, I ended the call. I sat staring at my reflection in the dark screen, a cold certainty settling in my chest. He would never see me as an equal unless he was forced to look up. I stood my stance firm. I was ready for the fight. He didn't even know he'd started. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the city through the glass wall of my office. The buildings gleamed under the afternoon sun, cold, sharp, beautiful. It struck me how many people measured success by what they could touch, when true success was often invisible, built quietly in the dark. Evelyn knocked lightly on the door. You all right? I nodded. Just reminded where I came from. She stepped in, arms crossed. You don't owe them proof. Maybe not, I said softly. But I owe myself closure. Outside, the light began to fade. By 6, the office was quiet. My employees headed home, their laughter fading down the hall. I stayed behind alone with the hum of servers and the soft glow of monitors. On one screen, the Aurora logo pulsed gently. Beneath it, the system dashboard displayed the number of students currently active on our platform, 872461. Nearly 900,000 children are learning through something I'd built from scratch while my father thought I was consulting. The irony wasn't lost on me. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the exhaustion wash over me. This wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about justice, about balance, about showing that what they dismissed as failure was in truth the foundation of something far greater than their approval. The intercom buzzed. Robert's voice came through Ms. Bennett. Your car's ready. Thank you, Robert, I said. I'll be down at 5. I shut down the screens one by one, the room darkening around me. As the last monitor went black, my reflection appeared faintly in the glass. Calm, controlled, ready. Because deep down, I knew something none of them did. Yet this wasn't the end of a chapter. It was the prelude to revelation. And when the next family dinner came, I wouldn't be the one sitting in silence. I'd be the one rewriting what the Bennett name meant. I grabbed my coat and walked out, the city lights flickering through the elevator glass. Somewhere below, engines roared, horns blared, life moved fast. But my revenge, my justice would come slowly, precisely, beautifully. Timed. And when it did, even my father's laughter wouldn't be enough to drown it out. The smell of rain lingered in the air when I woke up on Wednesday morning. It had poured all night, tapping on the windows like a quiet reminder that even storms have rhythm. I sat at the edge of the bed, half listening to the hum of the city beyond my window. The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and cold. I didn't reach for my phone right away. I wanted a few minutes of stillness before the world demanded my attention again. But when I finally did check it, the first message made my chest tighten. Mom, your father says Ryan wants to see you before Friday's dinner. He's worried you might embarrass him again. Embarrass him! The word landed like a slap. I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly, and set the phone down. They hadn't changed, not even a little. Downstairs, the coffee machine whirred to life. I moved through the kitchen like I was on autopilot, grinding beans, pouring water, staring at the slow drip into my mug. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Anger was too simple. What I felt was older, deeper, a mix of fatigue and defiance. When I opened my laptop, the Aurora Systems dashboard was already glowing on the screen. Numbers streamed across it. Contracts, schools' onboarded systems online. Every metric was green, every graph rising. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. Success doesn't erase the past. It only exposes who never believed in it. A notification popped up on the corner of the screen, reminder MIT Alumni Gala, 7:00 p.m. Thursday. I had almost forgotten. I hadn't attended one in years. Too many faces that reminded me of the beginning, back when I was the quiet girl in a sea of brilliance trying to prove she deserved to be there. That night replayed in my head the scholarship letter, the excitement, the way my father barely looked up when I told him. He'd smiled at Ryan's football trophy that same evening, clapping him on the back, while I stood in the doorway holding the future in my hands and watching it go unnoticed. I minimized the Aurora Systems dashboard, the green light shrinking to a small icon, a stark contrast to the memory. I could still hear his voice, MIT's nice Laura, but you should focus on something practical. Maybe business like your brother. I had smiled then too, hiding the disappointment like I'd been trained to. Now, years later, I built a company that MIT invited to collaborate on national education initiatives. Practical enough, I thought bitterly. My phone buzzed again, this time a call from Ryan. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. Morning, I answered. Laura, he said, voice smooth but hesitant. Listen, Dad wants everything to go smoothly Friday. He's inviting the board from Bennett Real Estate. He doesn't want, any tension. Tension, I repeated. You mean honesty? He sighed. You don't have to make this difficult. Just come smile, maybe network a little. Dad's under a lot of pressure. Ryan. I said, has it ever occurred to you that Dad's pressure isn't my problem? There was silence on the line, just his shallow breathing. You've always been difficult, he muttered finally. I don't know why you insist on making things harder for yourself. Maybe because I stopped confusing silence with peace, I replied, and hung up before he could respond. The rest of the morning vanished in meetings and emails, but my thoughts kept circling back to that phone call. It wasn't just about the dinner. It was about years of conditioning being told to stay small, polite, and visible. At noon, I grabbed my coat and left the office. The city was still damp, the sidewalks glistening under weak sunlight. I walked to a cafe near the park, one I used to visit when I first started Aurora Systems. Back then, I'd sit in the corner with my laptop nursing cheap coffee and sketching out frameworks that would one day become $1 million platform. The barista recognized me instantly. Long time, Ms. Bennett, she said with a grin. The usual, I smiled. You remember. As I waited, I caught sight of a familiar face 2 tables away. Professor Ellis, my old mentor from MIT. His hair was whiter now, but his posture was the same, straight-backed and confident. Professor Ellis, he looked up, squinting for a second before his eyes lit up. Laura Bennett. My God, it's been years. We talked for nearly an hour about MIT, about technology, about how much the world had changed since I'd sat in his classroom. He asked what I was doing now. I run a small educational technology firm, I said carefully. He chuckled. Small, Laura. I read the Federal Education Access Report last week. Aurora Systems. You're the lead provider, aren't you? I froze for a second. You read that? Everyone in the field read it, he said. You've built something extraordinary. Hearing it from him meant more than I expected. Thank you, I said quietly. He leaned forward, eyes kind but sharp. You always were the one they underestimated. That line hit harder than he could know. By the time I left the cafe, the sky had cleared completely. The city glowed golden under the late afternoon sun. For the first time in days, my chest felt lighter. That evening, I returned home and opened my old notebook, the one I'd carried for years. Between the sketches and plans, a folded letter fell out. My MIT acceptance letter. The paper was worn at the folds, but the words were still clear: full academic scholarship, awarded for outstanding innovation in educational technology. I ran my fingers across the page and smiled faintly. That letter had once been my proof. Now it was a relic, a reminder of who I was before the world tried to tell me who I wasn't. Outside, the rain had returned, tapping gently on the window. I closed the notebook and whispered to myself, they can laugh all they want, Friday, but I know who I am. My laptop screen lit up again with a message from Evelyn Gala tomorrow. MIT's president wants to speak with you personally. Should I confirm me? Yes. Let's make sure the press isn't there. Evelyn, understood. I smiled. The last time I'd been to an MIT event, I'd been invisible. This time, the stage was mine. I leaned back, watching the rain blur the city lights outside. The world was shifting quietly, just like I had. By the time the clock struck midnight, I knew exactly how the next few days would unfold. The dinner, the reveal, the silence that would follow. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because this time, when they tried to laugh at me, I'd have something far more powerful than words. Proof. The ballroom shimmered under soft amber light, chandeliers casting a soft, fractured light across the polished floor. Waiters moved between tables with quiet precision, their trays balanced with glasses of wine and silver bowls of roasted apples and cinnamon cream. Conversations overlapped: old classmates, investors, professors, all speaking in that polite, eager rhythm of people measuring one another's success. I stood at the edge of the crowd, my champagne untouched. The MIT Alumni Gala hadn't changed in 12 years. Same music, same faces, same hierarchy of attention. Only I had changed. Laura Bennett, a voice called from behind me. I turned and found Dean Parker, his hair now streaked with silver, but his posture still military straight. Dean Parker, I said, smiling politely. You vanished after graduation, he said. Word was, you started something in educational software. Something like that, I replied. He smiled knowingly. Not just something. I read the Aurora Systems case study last month. You've done remarkable work, Laura. The compliment was warm, sincere, but part of me couldn't help noticing how easily admiration replaced dismissal when people realized what you'd built. I thanked him and moved toward the table with my name card. I had barely sat down when a familiar voice cut through the hum of the room. Well, well. If it isn't Laura Bennett. I turned. Jessica Fields, my old classmate. Perfect hair, perfect posture, same smirk that used to follow every competition we'd both entered. She'd gone on to work for a big tech firm in San Francisco, constantly posting articles about her disruptive leadership. Jessica. I said, my voice even. It's been a while. It has, she said, her tone sweet but sharp. I heard you went into nonprofit work. That's admirable. I smiled. Admirable is one word for it. She tilted her head. I'm in acquisitions now. We actually tried to reach Aurora Systems for a partnership last quarter, but they never responded. Really, I said, swirling my drink. I'll have to check with the owner. Her brow furrowed. Owner? Before I could answer, Dean Parker approached the microphone at the front of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying easily. Tonight we honor alumni who've made extraordinary contributions to innovation and education. Our next honoree embodies both. Jessica's smile tightened. I already knew what was coming. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Aurora Systems, Laura Bennett. For a second, the entire room seemed to pause. Jessica's eyes widened. Someone gasped softly from the next table. Then applause filled the air. I rose slowly, every movement deliberate. The moment felt surreal, familiar faces turned toward me, clapping for the same woman they once ignored. The same girl they'd dismissed as too quiet, too idealistic. As I reached the stage, the dean handed me the award, a glass prism engraved with my company's name. "Your work has revolutionized educational access nationwide," he said. "Thank you for proving that purpose and profit can coexist." I smiled at him, then faced the crowd. "When I first started Aurora Systems," I began, "I was told that education doesn't pay, that helping others isn't a business model. I was told to think smaller, safer, louder. I didn't listen. I built it quietly instead." The applause grew again, but my eyes caught Jessica's. Her smile was brittle now. When the ceremony ended, people lined up to speak to me, investors, professors, alumni, eager to connect. Each handshake felt like irony in motion. For years, they'd taught me to seek their approval. Tonight, they sought mine. By the time I slipped away from the crowd, the night air outside felt crisp, cleansing. My car waited at the curb, Robert holding the door open. "Congratulations, ma'am," he said with a small nod. "Thank you," I said, stepping inside. "Let's go home." As the city lights blurred past the window, I thought about Friday night's family dinner. About the way my father would look at me, still convinced he understood the world better than I ever could. About the way Ryan would brag about his latest project, the way Mom would smile and avoid the silence that followed when anyone mentioned me. They didn't know yet. They didn't know that the contracts my company had signed were worth more than Ryan's entire firm, that the digital infrastructure of Bennett Real Estate, the system he bragged about developing, was licensed from Aurora Systems. They didn't know that every time my father mentioned his friend on the city council and the new educational funding initiative, he was quoting language written by my legal team. I rested my head against the seat, closing my eyes. The revenge wasn't about humiliating them, it was about truth, about balance, about letting reality speak louder than their laughter. Robert's voice broke the silence. "Dinner with the family tomorrow, right?" "Yes," I said softly. "Would you like me to bring the Bentley?" I hesitated, then smiled. "No, let's use the sedan, the one they all hate." He chuckled. "Understood." The car glided through the city streets, passing rows of glowing storefronts and blurred reflections in the rain-streaked glass. I thought about what the dean had said, that purpose and profit could coexist. He was right. But I also knew something deeper, that sometimes purpose needed to hide until the world was ready to recognize it. Back home, I went straight to my study. The glass award still gleamed in my hand. I set it down beside my old notebook, the same one filled with sketches and plans, the same one I'd carried through years of disbelief. Beside it lay my phone, buzzing with messages from people who once ignored me. "We should collaborate. Incredible work. So proud to know you." I smiled faintly. Praise felt strange now, like hearing an echo of a song I'd stopped singing years ago. I turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow of the city outside. The sound of distant traffic mixed with the steady hum of servers from the hidden room beyond the wall. Tomorrow, I would sit at a dinner table, surrounded by people who believed I was small. And tomorrow night, they would learn the difference between being underestimated and being forgotten. I ran my fingers along the award's smooth edge, the engraved letters glinting under the light. Then I whispered into the quiet room, "Let's finish this." The scent of baked apples and cinnamon filled the house when I walked through my parents' front door. The warmth of the oven fought against the November chill outside, but somehow the room still felt cold. My father stood near the fireplace, glass in hand, already mid-conversation with Ryan and two of his business associates. He saw me, raised an eyebrow, and offered the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he said loud enough for the entire room to hear, "look who decided to grace us with her presence." "Good evening, Dad," I said evenly, setting my coat over the arm of a chair. Ryan grinned, his suit perfectly tailored, his watch catching the light. "Nice car out front," he said, his tones soaked in sarcasm. "Still driving that. What is it?" "The economic model." "It's paid for," I said simply. He laughed and nudged his friend. Laura here believes reliability is more important than reputation. Their laughter blended with the sound of clinking glasses. I smiled faintly. Funny how those two things often trade places. My mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Her face softened when she saw me, but her voice stayed formal. "Laura, sweetheart, you're late. Dinner's ready." "I had a meeting," I said. Dad gave a low chuckle. "Another one of your computer charity projects." I met his gaze. "Something like that." We moved to the dining room, where the long mahogany table waxed to a high sheen reflected the light from above. Every plate and fork gleamed with precision. My parents had always treated dinner like a stage, and tonight was no exception. Ryan's wife Amanda sat opposite me. She gave a practiced smile. "Laura, you really should consider joining one of Ryan's panels next quarter. It's about sustainable real estate, something your little tech work could probably learn from." "Maybe," I said. "Though we tend to focus on sustainability in a different sense." Dad leaned back, clearly enjoying himself. "Speaking of which," he said, "Ryan just closed a new downtown development. A massive one. The mayor himself called it the future of the city." Ryan waved a modest hand. "It's nothing compared to what you've done, Dad. I just follow your example." The compliment landed right where it was aimed. My father laughed, clapping Ryan on the back. "That's my boy." I stared at the wine in my glass. Same script, different night. Ryan the heir apparent. Me, the quiet disappointment. "So Laura," my mother said carefully, breaking the silence, "how's your work?" "It's going well," I said. "Busy." "Busy," my father repeated with a scoff. "That's what people say when they don't have results." The table chuckled again. I took a sip of wine and looked directly at him. "Some results don't fit into dinner conversation." He frowned. "That sounds like an excuse." I smiled. "Maybe it's privacy." The air tightened. My mother tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but my father wasn't done. He leaned forward, his tone sharp. "You know, Laura, you're old enough to think seriously about your future. Ryan's got investments, property, a network." "What do you have?" Ryan's wife leaned in with false concern. "Oh, Tom, don't be harsh. She's got her nonprofit." I laughed softly. "Not exactly." Ryan raised a brow. "So what do you have?" "Laura, enlighten us." I looked around the table, their expectant faces, their polite amusement. My hands were steady when I set my glass down. "What I have," I said quietly, "is something none of you ever asked about." Dad smirked. "A fantasy." "A company," I said. "A successful one." The laughter came instantly sharp and overlapping. Even my mother looked uncomfortable. Ryan shook his head. "Laura, a website or an app doesn't make you a CEO." "You're right," I said. "Results do." Before anyone could reply, the sound of a phone vibrating broke the moment. It was mine. I glanced at the screen. "Evelyn, urgent." Dad gestured impatiently. "Go ahead. Maybe your boss needs you." "I am the boss," I said, and answered the call on speaker. Laura Evelyn's voice came clear, steady, professional. "The federal contract has cleared all signatures. Congratulations, we're officially live." My father frowned. "Federal contract." Evelyn continued, unaware of the room she'd just silenced. $22.5 million confirmed. The Department of Education will issue the public statement Monday. I wanted you to hear it first, Ms. Bennett. Ryan's fork froze halfway to his mouth. My mother's hand stilled over her napkin. "Thank you, Evelyn," I said smoothly. "I'll review the press draft tonight." When the call ended, no one spoke for several seconds. Dad cleared his throat. "What was that work?" I said simply. Ryan's face flushed. "You're joking. You don't have federal contracts." "Apparently I do." Amanda leaned in, eyes wide. How big is your company?" I smiled faintly. "Big enough to make my schedule busier than yours." Dad forced a laugh, though it trembled. "You're telling us you're running some kind of major operation?" "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." The silence that followed wasn't disbelief. It was fear masquerading as confusion. My father's confidence cracked first. "What's the company called?" he asked quietly. "Aurora Systems," I said. Ryan's jaw tightened. "Wait. That's the firm we licensed our digital infrastructure from." I looked straight at him. Yes, Ryan. That would be mine. The room went completely still. The only sound was the faint ticking of the wall clock. My father's hand tightened around his glass. You mean we've been paying me, I said. For years. Ryan stared at me as if I'd just spoken another language. You can't be serious. Completely. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you tell us? I met her eyes softer now. Because you never asked. The air in the room had changed thick with disbelief, pride, and something darker. Ryan's face went pale. This can't be real. I reached for my phone again, tapped the screen, and slid it across the table. The screen showed the Aurora Systems dashboard live. Contracts, clients, revenue. His company name, Bennett Real Estate Group, sat clearly in the client column. Dad stared at it, speechless. Ryan's breathing grew uneven. Finally, I stood. Dinner was lovely, I said. But I have work to finish. Laura, Dad said, his voice strained. We need to talk about this. No, I said gently. You need to listen. And as I walked toward the door, my heels quiet on the hardwood floor, I could feel it, the first fracture in a lifetime of silence. Tomorrow the cracks will widen. But tonight, I let the silence speak for itself. No one moved for a full 10 seconds after I spoke. The sound of the grandfather clock filled the silence, steady and cold like a heartbeat in an empty hall. My father's face was the first to shift, his practiced smirk, fading into something rawer, something close to fear. Ryan sat rigid in his chair, knuckles white against the table edge, his jaw working as if he were chewing his own disbelief. You're saying, my father began slowly, his voice low, that we've been paying you for the past 3 years. I tilted my head. You've been licensing Aurora Systems technology. Your IT team signed those contracts. My company simply delivered what you paid for. Ryan's wife, Amanda, broke the silence with a nervous laugh. This can't be real. Laura. Come on. How could you possibly be running a company of that scale because I built it? I said evenly. While you were all laughing about my non-profit hobby, I was creating something that would outlive your family business. Ryan shot to his feet, his chair scraping harshly against the wood. You're lying. You don't even... I turned my phone toward him, tapping the screen once. A live feed of the Aurora Systems operations dashboard filled the display, revenue counters, server, data client updates scrolling in real time. His eyes followed the numbers. See that? I said quietly. That's your payment from 2 days ago, processed through your accounting department at exactly 8:27 in the morning. Amanda gasped softly. My mother, pale and trembling, reached for her wine glass but missed. My mother's hand froze midair, hovering over her napkin. My father's eyes narrowed, the anger in them replaced by calculation. What are you planning to do with this? He demanded. Humiliate us. I leaned forward, my voice steady. No, Dad. I'm done with humiliation. I'm just correcting the record. Ryan slammed his fist against the table. You could have told us. You could have said something. I met his gaze. Would you have listened? The question landed like a blow. Ryan's lips parted, but no sound came out. For years, he'd measured my worth in silence. Now that silence was his. Dad pushed back his chair and stood, his tone sharp again. You think you can embarrass this family with your secrets? We built our reputation on trust, on transparency. I almost laughed. You built your reputation on appearances, Dad. On pretending things were perfect while you ignored anything that didn't fit your version of success. My mother's voice cracked through the air, fragile and trembling. Her eyes searched mine, not with accusation, but a quiet, complex sadness. Enough, both of you. But no one listened. Ryan's voice rose again. Do you realize what this looks like? You've been sitting at the table letting us think you're barely scraping by when in reality, I interrupted softly, I was building everything you told me I couldn't. The room fell quiet again. The sound of the rain outside grew louder, pressing against the windows like static. Dad's tone softened, almost pleading. Laura, we're your family. Why would you hide something like this? I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I saw him not the authority figure, not the critic, but the man who couldn't recognize pride unless it wore his reflection. Because I said you never saw me unless I failed. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. Do you remember when I got into MIT? You didn't even look up from Ryan's trophy. Do you remember when I launched Aurora? You called it a waste of time. Every step I took, you told me it wasn't enough. So I stopped showing you. I stopped waiting for your approval and built something that didn't need it. My mother pressed her hands to her mouth. Her eyes shimmered with tears she didn't want to show. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, muttering, "This is insane." I turned to him. You once told me success was about visibility. Ryan, about making sure everyone sees how big your car is, how shiny your office looks. But real success doesn't need witnesses. It speaks for itself. Amanda shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The arrogance she usually wore like perfume had vanished, replaced by quiet awe. My father stared at the glowing screen still sitting on the table, the Aurora Systems dashboard casting faint light across his face. He looked smaller under it. How big is this company of yours really global? I said. We operate in 22 countries. Over 1 million users daily. Ryan swallowed hard. 1 million, yes, I said, standing now. And by Monday, when the federal contract goes public, everyone will know it. For the first time that night, Ryan didn't look angry. He looked lost. My mother spoke softly. Laura, we're proud of you. We just didn't understand. I wanted to believe her. But pride that arrived only after proof was just relief wearing makeup. I smiled faintly. You don't have to understand. You just have to stop underestimating me. At that, Robert appeared quietly in the doorway, immaculate as always in his dark suit. Excuse me, Ms. Bennett, he said. Your evening car is ready. The title landed like thunder. Ms. Bennett. The same girl my father had mocked for barely making rent now had a chauffeur waiting at the door. My father's mouth tightened. A chauffeur, I picked up my bag. Yes, he drives for Aurora Systems, Ryan muttered. Of course he does. Robert stepped forward slightly. Your jet confirmation just came through as well, ma'am. Would you like me to finalize the itinerary? The silence that followed was absolute. My father's glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the floor. A jet, my mother whispered. I nodded. A business necessity. Sometimes success requires speed. Ryan's voice cracked. You're serious? Completely. I turned back to my father, meeting his stunned expression one last time. You always said I needed to think practically. I did. I just didn't think small. I walked toward the door, my heels soft against the wood. The house behind me still frozen in disbelief. As Robert opened the door, the cool night air rushed in, sharp and freeing. I didn't look back, but I could feel their eyes following me, the same eyes that once looked through me now, trying to catch up to what they'd missed. Outside, the car's black surface gleamed under the porch light. I slid inside the door, closing with a satisfying click. Robert looked at me through the rearview mirror. All right, Ms. Bennett, perfect, I said quietly. Take me home. And as the car pulled away, the house behind me grew smaller, its windows glowing faintly in the dark like a stage where the actors had just realized the play was over. By the time I got home that night, the city was quiet, wrapped in the kind of silence that follows a storm. I kicked off my heels and dropped my keys on the counter, the sound echoing through the empty house. My heart was still racing, though my voice during dinner had been steady. It always amazed me how calm could hide chaos so easily. The clock on the wall read 11:42. My phone had been buzzing non-stop since I left my parents' house, missed calls, messages, voicemails. Mostly from Ryan. A few from my mother. None from my father. I ignored them all. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy with the smell of wet pavement. Streetlights cast long reflections across the road, turning everything gold and quiet. For a moment, I let myself breathe. I'd done what I needed to do, spoken the truth out loud in front of the people who'd spent their lives denying it. And yet, instead of relief, I felt something else, the slow ache of everything that had come before it. The years of silence, the condescension, the laughter, the pretending. It's strange how revenge doesn't feel like victory. It feels like release. My phone buzzed again, this time with a new message from Evelyn. Evelyn, the news just leaked. The education department posted about the Aurora contract early. Congratulations, boss, you're trending. I smiled, faintly opened my laptop, and pulled up the article. There it was, my company's name in bold. Aurora Systems partners with the Federal Education Department to expand digital access nationwide. The headline was clean professional. But the comments below told another story. I quickly scrolled through the live comments on the government website. A stream of excitement, questions about the CEO, and disbelief that the news had dropped so late on a Friday. Within minutes, my name started appearing on social feeds. Laura Bennett, CEO of Aurora Systems. The quiet life I'd built was no longer quiet. I sat down at my desk watching the notifications flood in. Emails from journalists, requests for interviews, even a congratulatory message from the MIT Alumni Association. For years, I'd worked in the shadows, letting Aurora's results speak instead of my name. Now there was no hiding. A knock sounded at the front door. I froze, then walked carefully through the hallway. When I opened it, Ryan stood there, rein still clinging to his hair and jacket. His usual polished confidence was gone. He looked tired, angry, confused, but mostly lost. "Laura," he said quietly. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered slowly, looking around the house like it was unfamiliar. "You weren't answering your phone." I wasn't ready to talk. He exhaled sharply. "Dad's furious. He said you made a fool of him." "Did I asked calmly. "Or did he do that himself?" Ryan didn't answer. He just stood there staring at the floor. "You should have told us. You should have said something. I tried." I said. "You just never listened." He finally looked up, his voice quieter now. "All these years, you let us think you were struggling. You let us pity you. I didn't let you do anything, Ryan. You chose to see me that way." His mouth tightened. "You know how Dad is. You know what that dinner meant to him. He wanted the family to look successful. And what does success look like to him?" I asked. "Cars, houses." The applause of people who'd leave the moment the wine ran out. Ryan didn't respond, and the silence between us grew heavy. I walked past him to the living room and gestured toward the window. "See that streetlight? It's powered by the city's smart grid network. Aurora built the educational version of that system. Our software runs in over 1,500 districts across 22 states. That's success, Ryan. But not the kind that fits in a driveway." He looked at me like he was seeing someone he didn't recognize. "You really built all that?" "Yes," I said softly. "Every line of code, every team, every contract. I built it while you laughed at my little charity job." Ryan rubbed his temples. "You're right. We were awful. But you have to understand, Dad built everything in control, on being the one who knows more. You just took that from him." "No," I said. He gave it away when he stopped believing his daughter could be more than his reflection. Ryan stared out the window, silent. After a long moment, he said, "He's not used to being wrong." "Then maybe it's time he learned," I said. He gave a small, bitter laugh. "He won't apologize. I don't expect him to." "Then what do you want, Laura?" he asked. "Because from where I'm standing, you've already won." I thought about it, then shook my head. This isn't about winning. It's about truth. About being seen. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. "You know, Dad told me once that you were too soft for business. Too emotional." I smiled faintly. "Turns out emotion scales pretty well when you turn it into purpose." Ryan looked down, hands in his pockets. "So what happens now?" "Nothing dramatic," I said. "Life goes on. The company keeps growing. You keep building whatever empire you want. I'll keep building mine." He nodded again quietly. "You really don't want revenge, do you?" "I already got it," I said. "The moment you realized who you'd underestimated." He let out a slow breath, something like respect in his eyes. "You're a better person than me." "I'm not," I said. "I just stopped needing to prove it." He gave a small nod, then turned toward the door. "Dad's going to call you tomorrow. Just be prepared." I smiled. I always am. When the door closed behind him, I stood there for a long moment staring at the faint trail of rainwater he'd left on the floor. Then I turned back to my office, sat down, and opened my laptop again. The screen glowed softly in the dark room. The numbers kept rising: new contracts, new inquiries, new partnerships. Somewhere my father was probably pacing in his office, trying to process how the daughter he'd dismissed had built something larger than his legacy. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of old hurt, I felt peace. Not the kind that comes from being right, but the kind that comes from finally being free. Outside, the rain started again, soft and steady. The kind that doesn't announce itself but changes everything quietly, drop by drop. I closed my laptop, leaned back, and whispered to the empty room, "Let them talk." The truth is loud enough now. The call came early the next morning before the sun had fully risen. I'd barely had time to pour my first cup of coffee when the phone buzzed across the counter. The caller ID made my stomach tighten, Dad. For a brief moment, I thought about letting it ring, about giving him the silence he'd earned. But then I remembered the look on his face last night, the disbelief, the pride he refused to show, the wounded ego beneath his anger. I answered. "Laura." His voice was clipped, controlled. "Good morning, Dad." A pause. I could almost hear him trying to decide whether to start with anger or authority. "I suppose congratulations are in order. You're quite the headline today." "So I've seen," I said evenly. "Aurora's announcement went public early." He exhaled sharply. "The Department of Education, the federal contract. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Everyone's talking about it." "Good," I said. "That's the idea." Another pause. "You blindsided us." I set my mug down gently. "Did I?" "You could have told us," he said. "We're family. Laura, you don't spring something like this on us at dinner like a stunt." I felt a familiar sting rise in my chest but pushed it down. "I didn't spring anything, Dad. I answered your questions." His tone hardened. "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed this family." Ryan says the look on my associates' faces. I cut him off. "They weren't embarrassed because of me. They were embarrassed because you mocked your own daughter for driving a car that runs fine while she was funding half the city's educational programs." He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke again, his voice was lower. "You've changed." "I had to," he sighed, the sound weary, unfamiliar. "Laura, I spent my whole life building a name people respected. I didn't mean to dismiss you, but you have to understand what you do. It was never visible, and in this world, visibility matters." "Visibility isn't the same as value," I said. "You taught Ryan to chase visibility. I built something that lasts." He didn't argue. That silence, the kind that only follows realization, hung heavy between us. Finally, he said, "You made us look foolish." "No, Dad," I replied softly. "You did that when you decided that my worth depended on what I parked outside your house." He didn't answer right away. I could picture him standing in his study, one hand gripping his glass desk, the morning light slanting through the blinds. For once, the silence didn't make me shrink, it made him small. Then, unexpectedly, his tone shifted. "Ryan told me you own Aurora outright." "I do. And that you've been contracting with Bennett Real Estate." "For years," I said. He exhaled again. "And I suppose that means your company has seen our financials." I hesitated, then said yes. There it was, the unspoken fear. My father's empire wasn't as stable as it looked, and he knew I knew. He laughed once without humor. "So now my daughter knows my weaknesses." "No, Dad," I said quietly. "I've always known them. I just stopped trying to fix them." For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then his voice softened. "You're more like me than you realize." "Maybe once," I said. "But I learned from your mistakes." The line went quiet again. When he finally spoke, his tone carried something I'd never heard before, Not anger, not pride, but uncertainty. What do you want from me, Laura? Nothing, I said. That's the point. You don't want reconciliation or acknowledgement. I thought about it. Acknowledgement maybe, but not the kind you give out of guilt. I just want you to stop pretending you know what success looks like. He gave a small, bitter chuckle. You always did have a sharp tongue. I learned that from you too. There was another pause. Your mother's been crying since last night, he said. She feels awful about how we treated you. She doesn't need to, I said. She played her part the way she always has, keeping the peace. He didn't deny it. You've grown colder. I've grown careful. Something shifted in his voice. Then the anger melting into something quieter, older. When you were little, he said you used to sit in my office and tell me you'd build something important one day. I thought you meant a family, not an empire. I smiled faintly. I built both, Dad. You just never noticed the second one. He cleared his throat. The mayor called this morning. He said Aurora Systems has more contracts in the city than any private developer. You've done well. It sounded like pride, but restrained, guarded. The kind of compliment a man gives when he's not ready to admit he was wrong. Thank you, I said simply. After a long moment, he said, You're coming to the Christmas dinner, I hope. I almost laughed. After last night. It's tradition, he said. And I'd like to speak with you, properly, without an audience. His voice was still proud, still cautious, but underneath it, I heard something real. The faintest hint of regret. I'll think about it, I said. Laura, he said, his tone softening again. For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've done, even if I don't understand it. The line went quiet for a long moment, the simple words hanging heavy in the dim morning light. I smiled faintly, a sense of finality settling over me. Thank you, I said quietly. That's all I ever wanted to hear. When I hung up, the room was still dim. The sun had just begun to edge over the rooftops, painting the city in a pale gold light. I stood there for a long time, holding the phone, feeling the weight of everything unsaid. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something close. I turned toward my office where the screens glowed softly in the half-light. Aurora's numbers continued to rise. Contracts messages, new opportunities. But for the first time, I didn't check them right away. Instead, I just stood by the window watching the city wake up, thinking about how far I'd come. How far I'd had to go alone. For years, I'd built in silence. Now the silence was finally speaking back, and this time it was saying, you were right to believe in yourself. Outside, a new day began. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the daughter who disappointed her father. I felt like the woman who finally taught him what success truly meant. The invitation arrived in the mail a week later, printed on cream cardstock with the Bennett family crest embossed at the top, annual Christmas dinner. It read in elegant cursive, followed by the address of my parents' estate and the familiar note, attendance expected. I turned the card over in my hand, half smiling. Some traditions never died, especially the ones built on appearances. I almost threw it away. Almost. But something in me, curiosity maybe, or closure, made me set it aside instead. By the time the evening came, the city was blanketed in snow. The streets glowed under streetlights, quiet and clean, as my car pulled up the long driveway to the Bennett residence. The house looked exactly the same as it always had, tall windows, immaculate landscaping, every light burning bright, as if to remind the world of its importance. Robert stepped out from the driver's seat and opened my door. Are you sure you want to do this, Ms. Bennett? I met his steady gaze and smiled. I think it's time. The heavy oak doors opened before I could knock. My mother stood in the entryway. Her expression caught between surprise and nervous relief. She wore a soft gray sweater instead of her usual designer silk, and for a moment she looked almost human again. Laura, she said quietly, you came. I said I'd think about it. She smiled faintly, her voice trembling. Your father's in the study. Ryan and Amanda are already here. Come in, sweetheart. I stepped into the house, the familiar scent of pine and cinnamon filling the air. The same chandelier hung above the foyer. The same polished staircase gleamed in the light. but something felt different. Or maybe it was me. Ryan appeared from the living room, hands in his pockets, expression cautious. "You look good." "Thanks," I said. "So do you." Amanda followed behind him, holding a glass of wine. Her usual confidence softened by discomfort. "Laura," she said with an awkward smile, "that article about your company, it was impressive." "I appreciate that," I replied simply. We made small talk as we walked toward the dining room, where the long mahogany table gleamed beneath silver candle holders. My father stood at the head, dressed as always in his dark tailored suit, posture perfect. When he saw me, his expression flickered a hint of pride, quickly masked by formality. "Laura," he said, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't either," I said. He nodded once, then gestured toward the seat across from him. "We're glad you did." As I sat down, I could feel the tension settle into the air like dust. The clinking of silverware, the low hum of the fire, the soft Christmas music, all of it couldn't mask the undercurrent of discomfort. For a few minutes, no one spoke. Then, as if on cue, my father cleared his throat. "Your company's been in the papers all week," he said. "Congratulations on the contract." "Thank you," I said. Ryan jumped in, trying to sound casual. "Everyone at the firm's talking about it. You've made quite the impression." "Apparently," I said, though I didn't do it for impressions. Dad smirked faintly. "Still, you've built something remarkable." "I've been reading about Aurora Systems, your educational platforms, the federal partnerships." "Impressive work." I studied his face. He was trying in his own rigid way. "Thank you," I said again, quieter this time. Amanda leaned forward slightly. "I saw your interview on CNBC this morning," she said. "They called you one of the most influential women in tech." My mother beamed with pride, though she tried to hide it behind her napkin. "Our daughter," she whispered, mostly to herself. The conversation began to loosen after that, the edges softening. My father poured himself a glass of red wine and glanced up. "You know," he said, "I always thought you'd end up in law or finance. Something more traditional. But you've clearly proven me wrong. I think that's the first time you've ever said those words I said." His lips curved into a reluctant smile. "Maybe it is." Ryan chuckled. "Trust me, Laura, Dad doesn't admit that often." It was strange sitting there with them. The same table where I'd once been invisible now felt smaller, warmer somehow. But beneath the civility, I sensed what wasn't being said, the apology no one quite knew how to voice. After dinner, we moved into the living room. The fire crackled softly and snow fell outside in lazy spirals. My mother handed out coffee while my father stood near the mantel, staring at an old family photo, me and Ryan as children standing beside a much younger version of him. "You know," he said finally, his back still turned when you left for college, "I worried you wouldn't make it on your own." I said nothing. He turned, then, his expression gentler than I'd ever seen it. "I thought the world would eat you alive. Turns out you built one of your own." My throat tightened, but I managed a steady voice. "It wasn't easy." "I imagine not." He looked at me for a long time, his voice softening further. "I was hard on you because I thought I was protecting you, but maybe all I did was push you away." It wasn't a full apology, but it was close enough to count. "I turned out okay," I said. He nodded. "You did more than okay." For a moment there was real silence, not the cold kind, but the kind that felt like peace. My mother wiped her eyes discreetly and Ryan raised his glass. "To Laura," he said, "for proving us all wrong." Everyone followed, glasses clinking softly. Even my father. Later, as the evening wound down, my father walked me to the door. The wind had picked up outside, flurries swirling through the air. He hesitated before speaking. "Your driver's waiting?" "Yes," I said. "Same as before." He gave a small nod. "You know, when he called you Ms. Bennett that night, it caught me off guard. I didn't realize how much I'd missed hearing respect in someone's voice when they said your name." "Maybe now you understand why it mattered," I said gently. He smiled faintly. "I do." As I stepped out into the cold, he called after me. "Laura." I turned. "Next time, don't wait for an invitation. Just come home." For the first time in years, the words didn't sting. They warmed. I smiled. I will. Robert opened the car door as I walked down the steps. The lights from the house glowed behind me, soft against the snow. As I slid into the back seat, I caught my reflection in the window, strong calm, and finally at peace. "Home, Ms. Bennett?" Robert asked. "Yes," I said, leaning back as the car pulled away. "Let's go home." And as the house disappeared behind me, I realized that sometimes the sweetest victory isn't in being right, it's in being finally understood. 2 days after the dinner, I woke to a string of missed calls and one message from Evelyn that simply said, "Check the times." My heart gave a slow, steady thud as I reached for my phone. There it was on the front page of the business section: Aurora Systems expands nationwide. CEO Laura Bennett named one of the most influential women in technology. The headline hit harder than I expected. I stared at my name printed in bold, the photo beside it. Me at last week's conference, shaking hands with the education secretary. My expression in that picture was calm, professional, even detached. But I remembered how I'd felt inside that moment, steady, certain, finally enough. The article painted me as a visionary, someone who'd built a global company while staying grounded in community work. It quoted investors, educators, and even a senator praising Aurora's programs for bridging digital divides. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. 8 years of quiet labor, 8 years of being underestimated, 8 years of letting silence do my talking. Now the world was listening. My phone buzzed again. Evelyn's voice came through before I could even say hello. "You've officially broken the internet, boss." I laughed softly. "Let's hope it's not permanent." She chuckled. "Not unless you count the 300 emails in your inbox. CNN, Forbes, Tech World, even The Economist. Everyone wants an interview." "I'll review the requests," I said, standing and walking to the window. The city outside was bright under a pale winter sun, snow melting on the rooftops. "Let's schedule selectively. No overexposure. We'll let the work speak." "That's the plan," Evelyn said. Then her tone shifted quieter. "Your father called the office this morning." I froze. What? "He wanted your schedule," she said carefully. "Said he was planning a public event for the Bennett Foundation. He wants you there as a guest of honor." A small, incredulous laugh escaped me. "Guest of honor? That's rich. Do you want me to decline?" I hesitated. "No, I'll think about it." After she hung up, I sat down at my desk, fingers resting lightly on the edge of my laptop. The Bennett Foundation. The same organization that once refused to fund my pilot programs, claiming they lacked market relevance. And now they wanted me as their showpiece. I opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo, me at 21, standing in front of that same foundation building with a rejected proposal in my hands. My father had been smiling beside me in that photo, unaware that I'd already decided I would never need his approval again. Now, almost 10 years later, the tables had finally turned. A knock at my door pulled me from the memory. Robert stepped in, holding a small envelope. "This just arrived for you, Ms. Bennett." Hand-delivered. I took it, recognizing my father's handwriting instantly, a deliberate, rigid scrawl. Inside was a formal invitation, the Bennett Foundation Annual Gala, celebrating partnerships for progress, and beneath it, written in his own hand, "I'd like you to speak. Dad." I sat there for a long time, the paper trembling faintly in my hands. The gala was 3 nights away. When the evening came, the city glimmered under a wash of gold and snow. The event was held downtown in a historic hall lined with towering columns and glowing fixtures. I arrived in a sleek black dress, my hair pulled back, every movement measured and quiet. The press was already outside, flashes snapping as I stepped from the car. Inside, the air buzzed with voices, business leaders, politicians, donors. The very same people who once dismissed me as idealistic were now vying for a handshake. "Ms. Bennett," one investor said, smiling broadly. "It's an honor. Your company's expansion is all anyone can talk about." I smiled politely. "Thank you. We're just getting started." Across the room, I saw my father standing near the stage, deep in conversation with the mayor. When his eyes met mine, He excused himself and walked over. "You came," he said quietly. "I always keep my promises." He nodded, studying me for a moment. "You look different." "I feel different," I said. He hesitated, then gestured toward the stage. "They're expecting you to speak after my remarks. The theme tonight is legacy. Say whatever you like. Legacy." The irony was almost poetic. As the evening went on, I listened to the speeches, my father's booming voice praising progress, innovation, family values. Ryan spoke too, talking about bridging generations. It was all polished, rehearsed, and clean. Then it was my turn. I stepped onto the stage to polite applause, the lights warm on my face. For a moment, I just looked out at the crowd, the faces that had once looked past me. "Good evening," I began. "When I was 21, I brought a proposal to this foundation. I believed technology could change access to education for underprivileged students." The proposal was rejected. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. My father's posture stiffened in the front row, but he didn't interrupt. I was told my ideas were noble but not sustainable, that there was no measurable return, so I built my own foundation. And tonight, I stand here representing over 3 million students served across the country because sustainability begins when you stop asking for permission to make a difference. The room fell silent. The kind of silence that means people are listening not out of obligation, but because they can feel the truth in the air. I continued, my voice steady. Legacy isn't about who gets credit. It's about what remains standing when ego fades. My father taught me ambition. My family taught me discipline. But the world taught me something far greater: resilience. When I finished, the applause came slowly, then built echoing off the polished stone walls. I caught sight of my father, still seated, still composed, but his expression had changed. There was no pride, no anger, just realization. Afterward, he came to me quietly as guests began to leave. "You spoke well," he said. "Thank you." He hesitated, then added, "You made your point." "Did I?" He smiled faintly. "Yes, and it was worth hearing." I looked at him, absorbing the truth in his simple statement. It was a hard-won concession, not a celebration, but it was enough. The tension that had lived between us for years seemed to thin, slightly replaced by a strange, quiet respect. It wasn't an apology, but for once I didn't need one. As I left the hall, reporters called my name, microphones flashing in the cold. One asked Ms. Bennett, "What drives your success?" I paused, then said, "Remembering what failure felt like and never letting it define me." The next morning, the headline read, "Laura Bennett's speech redefines legacy." And for the first time, I knew the story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about arrival. It was late January, when the snow finally began to melt. The city was quieter now, the holiday noise replaced by the steady hush of winter. I sat in my office overlooking the skyline, the same office where all of this had started. Just me, a laptop, and a vision no one believed in. The headlines had started to fade. The interviews slowed. Aurora Systems had become a household name, but the noise around me was no longer about proving something, it was about purpose. Growth. The next chapter. I glanced at the framed photo on my desk, a picture of my first classroom in Newark, the one where I'd taught technology to kids using borrowed computers. The walls had been cracked, the air cold, but the children's eyes had been bright. That was where it began, not in a boardroom, not in a dinner argument, but in that small, crowded room full of possibility. My phone buzzed. A message from Ryan. "Lunch today, Dad's cooking. Don't say no." I smiled, shaking my head. My father's cooking was my first. I typed back quickly, "Fine. 1 hour." When I arrived at my parents' house that afternoon, the smell of baked apples drifted from the kitchen. My father stood by the stove, awkwardly holding a wooden spoon, while my mother watched with a mix of amusement and disbelief. "Don't look so surprised," he said when he saw me. "I can follow a recipe." Since when, I asked, laughing. Since I realized some things are better learned than commanded. The room went quiet for a moment, the air warm with something that felt almost like healing. We ate in the kitchen instead of the dining room, a small change but a meaningful one. There was no crystal, no polished silverware. Just plates, laughter, and the kind of conversation that didn't feel rehearsed. Ryan leaned back in his chair. "So Aurora's opening a new branch in Chicago next month," I said. "We're partnering with the city to build digital literacy centers." "That's incredible," my mother said softly. "You're doing more good than all of our family charities combined." My father gave a quiet nod. "You've built something remarkable, Laura. Something real." The words landed with the weight of decades. I didn't reply, just met his eyes, and for the first time there was no distance between us. After lunch, we moved to the living room. My father poured coffee for everyone, his movements slower, deliberate. "You know, he said, I used to think power came from control, from being the loudest in the room. But I watched you take control without ever raising your voice." I smiled faintly. "Silence can be powerful too." He nodded, thoughtful. "You taught me that." For a while, we just sat there, the fire crackling softly. Ryan started telling a story about one of his clients, and my mother laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes. The house, which had always felt so heavy, suddenly felt light again. When I stood to leave, my father walked me to the door. The winter air was sharp outside, but the sun had started to break through the clouds, glinting off the patches of melting snow. He hesitated before speaking. "Laura," he said, his voice quieter now, "I spent years trying to shape you into something I understood. But you became something better." I looked at him, my throat tight. "You finally see that." He smiled, small but genuine. "I do. And I'm proud of you." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. But it was real. And that made it perfect. When I got home, the house was still sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors. Robert met me at the door with a stack of letters. "Congratulations, Ms. Bennett. More partnership offers." I took them but set them aside. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to open them right away. Instead, I walked to my office, the soft hum of the servers greeting me like old friends. On one of the monitors, the Aurora dashboard flickered with real-time data. Schools connected, students logged in, lessons completed. Over 3 million active users. I sat down, resting my chin on my hand, watching the numbers climb. Each digit represented a story. A life changed. A child learning something they'd once thought was impossible. The door cracked open slightly. Robert peeked in. "You've got a message from the White House," he said. "They're inviting you to the National Education Forum next month." I smiled. "Tell them I'll be there." He nodded, but before leaving he added, "You know, Ms. Bennett, you've changed the way people see education. And success." "Maybe," I said softly. "But mostly I've just reminded them that the two can coexist." He smiled and closed the door behind him. I leaned back in my chair and let the quiet fill the room. Success, I realized, isn't about being the richest voice at the table or the loudest one in the room. It's about the legacy you leave, the impact that outlives your name. For so long, my story had been about proving them wrong. But now it wasn't about them anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated, and about showing them that silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's just preparation. I turned back to the window. Outside, the last traces of snow were dissolving into the ground, feeding something unseen beneath the surface. Growth always started quietly. And as the sky stretched open in soft shades of gold, I whispered the words I'd waited years to say, not in anger and in peace. I did it my way. Then I smiled, opened my laptop, and began writing the next chapter, this time not as the woman who was mocked for what she didn't have, but as the one who had everything that truly mattered. If you've ever been doubted, underestimated, or told that your dreams were too small, remember this: revenge isn't loud. It's living well enough that the truth no longer needs defending. And when that day comes, when they finally call you owner, don't look back in anger. Just smile and keep walking forward. Because the sweetest sound in the world isn't applause. It's your own peace. If you've been here with me through this story, thank you. Tell me, have you ever been underestimated and proved them wrong? Share your story below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay for the next one. Because sometimes the best revenge stories are still being written.